The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. One of the scribes came to Jesus and asked him, "Which is the first of all the commandments?" Jesus replied, "The first is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." The scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You are right in saying he is one and there is no other than he, and to love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is worth more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he answered with understanding, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And no one dared to ask him any more questions. The Gospel of the Lord. Why is it, do you suppose, that no one dares to ask him any more questions? Here we are in Mark's Gospel at the end of a whole series of questions that people have brought to Jesus. In come the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Herodians. They all come with questions. Is it lawful to pay tax to Caesar? This incredibly complex hypothetical about who will be married to whom in heaven, to show how ridiculous the idea of the resurrection is. Elsewhere in the gospel, people ask all kinds of questions. Will only a few be saved? Who sinned? Was it this man who's blind, or was it his parents? People are constantly asking questions to Jesus, and here now, no one dares to ask any more questions after this exchange. Why? What's going on? Is it just that Jesus has satisfied all of them? No, impossible, because in the Gospel of Mark, just a couple of days after this, the same people who are gathered here in the temple asking Jesus questions will be among the crowd putting him to death. He has not simply satisfied them. So why does no one dare ask any more questions? It has something to do with the question that this particular remarkable man asks, this scribe, and the answer that he receives. Everyone has been sparring with Jesus. They've asked questions not because they want to know the answer, but because they wish to go to combat with him. They want to expose his illegitimacy or the silliness of the ideas that he's proposing. They're not real questions, actually. And so, at the end, you end in what the Greeks called an aporia, which is a state of confusion. Here we've tried our best and we've got nothing. But at the end of this question, what Jesus says is, you, my friend, are not far from the kingdom of God. It's one of these moments when Jesus is kind of amazed at someone whom he encounters. You're not far from the kingdom of God. What a remarkable question you asked, and what a remarkable response you had. What is different about this man's question from so many of the other questions that people ask Jesus in the Gospels? Well, here's one big difference. Jesus answers this man's question precisely as it is asked. This almost never happens, to answer precisely the question that is asked. Frequently, Jesus responds with another question, or he doesn't really seem to answer the question that the person has asked. Why? Because he knows that that is actually not the essential issue that is in the depth of our heart. He has to change our question, or he has to pose a new question to us, or he has to answer a question that we did not ask. But here, the man says, what is the first of all the commandments? And Jesus immediately says, the first is this. He answers the question as it is asked. It's an indication that this is a question that Jesus very much would love to arise in our hearts. He wants us to ask, what is the first of commandments? What must this extraordinary scribe have been like? What kind of a person was he? In the law of ancient Israel, there was something like 630 some prescriptions of the law that a good devout Jew was required to fulfill. And you can just imagine this scribe really trying very desperately to do what the Lord is asking of him. But he wants to see what is essential. He wants to see to the heart of it. In the midst of all this great multiplicity, what is at the core of it? What is the first of the commandments? What's the essential core? And Jesus is only too happy to answer this question. Because the only thing that gives life to the law, the only thing that makes sense of all the many commandments is love. He is the revelation of the Father's love. And so everything that has come before him, all the prescriptions of the law, can only be understood correctly as manifestations of love. We see another remarkable aspect of this exchange in that Jesus extends and broadens the question of this man. He's got a good, firm base from which to start, and now he expands on that. The second commandment, he's asked about the first. The second commandment is this, to love your neighbor as yourself. And because this scribe has already been in a place where he is prepared to have his own love expanded, he goes without flinching to exactly that place. And it's almost like he has this great moment of confirmation. Okay, yes, here is this man who is answering everyone's question. He has answered my question that the heart of all of this is love. And guess what? There's an addendum. It's not only love directly up to God, but it's also love of our neighbors. He allows his love to be expanded without flinching. And that's why Jesus can say, you, my friend, are not far from the kingdom of heaven, because you've understood the core, what is essential. In these days, we're being invited to consider once again what is essential, because so much of the consoling practices of our external life have been stripped away. Yesterday in the parish, because I'm no longer in my normal office, I sat in the desk of our receptionist, Joyce, here at the parish, and I was trying to do a bit of work there at her desk, and the phone kept ringing. So I kept answering the phone as people were calling into the parish, and spent a lot of my time yesterday talking to people who are finding it very difficult that we are having to go without the sacraments in these days. And, frequently these conversations begin in great anger, actually, because people are so frustrated that it expresses, first of all, in terms of anger. But it's because of a great sense of sadness and having been deprived in a certain way. Had a good long conversation with one woman who tried to give me every single reason that we should be handing out communion from the tabernacle, even in spite of the difficulties. And I said to her, no, look, we're going to be faithful and obedient to what our Archbishop is asking of us. And we're going to let the Lord use this time to remind us of how gratuitous and how extraordinary and what an enormous gift the sacraments are. That deep sense of deprivation that we all feel is only going to magnify the sense of our awe and our gratefulness that the Lord gives us the gift of the sacraments. We do not simply have a faith in which everything is merely a thought, an idea, a theory. It's not simply something that we can experience in prayer, but it is this remarkable thing. The fact of the incarnation means when God comes in the flesh, he also now allows us to encounter him in the flesh, in receiving him bodily, in hearing the words of absolution, in having the water poured over our bodies in baptism, the consoling aspect of the sacraments. In this time, the Lord's bringing us back to the essential, which is all of these are an expression of his profound love and a motivation by which we can learn to love each other even more intensely. Let's use this opportunity now when we don't have ready, easy access to the sacrament